I want you to take a look at this slide and see what it says in terms of what you have learned to date is about FASB. FASB applies, everybody understand the standard setting process, right? You've learned that, right? In your accounting, you have these standard setting bodies which prescribe what? Generally accepted accounting principles, right? And those generally accepted accounting principles have to be followed, because if you don't follow them, what happens? Actually, you're in trouble with your auditors, right? Because they'll give you a qualified opinion or disclaim an opinion. So just like that, we have this entity called Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which was set up back in 1984. And what happened was somebody realized that you cannot apply generally accepted accounting principles which are suited to business to governments. It just doesn't work. So this body was set up to prescribe standards for governmental entities. So for instance, if you were the chief financial, if I were the chief financial officer of a public entity, when I prepare my financial statements, I don't go to FASB. I look at GASB standards and I have to follow them. If I follow them, I'm following governmental GAAP. That's the term, governmental GAAP, okay? And if I follow governmental GAAP, that means I'm working on my financial statements properly. Now, FASAB, which is the Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board, the federal government has its own standard setting. We won't get into that. Basically, what they do is they set standards for how federal government prepares its own financial statements. Which is the world's largest reporting entity, in your opinion? The world's largest financial reporting entity. The United States government. The United States government is the world's largest federal is the largest financial reporting entity. And I'll tell you a little bit about it in a minute. But notice that, it's one of my favorite questions, by the way. Non-governmental not-for-profits and governmental not-for-profits. If it's a non-governmental not-for-profit, do you understand the difference between a governmental and non-governmental not-for-profits? For instance, City of Newark operates the museum, right? That's what? A governmental not-for-profit. You could have a private museum, right? Which is not operated by a governmental entity. Whose standards do they follow? They follow FASB standards. If it's a governmental not-for-profit, they follow what? GASB. That's really the purpose of that slide, is for you to understand the distinction between those two, okay? I thought there was a question here. Let me just see. Oh, here. See this question here? This question, can you read this question 1-4? What should the response be to that question? Which one should they follow? They should follow GASB or FASB? Okay, how many people say FASB? First of all, what is it? It's a non-governmental, so we know what is it. That gives it away, right? So it's what? It's FASB. Yeah. Okay. So simple things like that, we talk about, this is how we apply that. Okay, everybody with me so far? Good. Very important to stay awake. Okay. There are two magical words here. Stewardship and accountability. Cannot forget those words. Okay? Stewardship and accountability. When governments collect revenues or taxes from people, they need to be accountable to those people. So as a taxpayer who's not very willing, and by the way, we'll talk about that, exchange and non-exchange transactions, accountability and stewardship is very important in financial reporting. It has to demonstrate it. That has to be demonstrated in your financial statements for governments. Okay. So let's think about this for a minute. You know, one thing that's different in governments is that governments tend to operate with budgets. You've heard a lot about discussion about budgets, right? What is a budget? Basically a plan to how you're going to spend and receive the funds for a period of time. But in governments, it's very important. I'll tell you how important it is. When I worked in the Meadowlands, and if we adopted a budget, if I overspent the budget, do you know it's a criminal offense, a misdemeanor, could go to jail for it. So budgets are very, very important in governments because as a device, and people who work in governments have to be very careful that they deal with budgets, which is legally adopted budget. Okay? So government financial reports are used primarily to compare actual results with legally adopted budget. People want to know, if you're going to spend $1 million, what did you spend by the end of the year? Okay? People want to know what your financial condition is, what your results of operation are, and whether you are complying with finance-related rules and regulations. And for that reason, people who work in government financial area have a special responsibility. It's sometimes more than in the corporate sector because of that accountability. And unfortunately, this last piece, assist in evaluating efficiency and effectiveness, does not exist. It would be nice if it does, but that's one of the objectives. But as much as GASB has tried to bring and measure efficiency and effectiveness, governments are fighting it. They don't want to report that. Federal government does, but not state and local government. I wonder why. Right? They don't want to talk about efficiency and effectiveness in financial reports, which is kind of a shame.